Hello, welcome to Crafting with Lee. Today I'm going to make this neon flower petal wreath. These are the supplies I'm going to use to make this wreath. I am actually going to use 21-inch and 10-inch metallic deco mesh. Normally with these kinds of wreaths you would want to use a poly mesh or a jute mesh. But for this wreath, I'm going to show you can also do it with regular deco mesh. You just have to double up on your layers for each petal. You'll also need plastic canvas. I've got mine at Walmart. A wire wreath form, lots and lots of zip ties, and something to create the center for your flower. I have a piece of foam that I picked up at Dollar Tree. Okay, I'm going to start by placing the canvas underneath my wreath form and using a permanent marker to trace just inside the center bar. And then I'm just going to cut this out, and I'm going to cut just inside the black line. And this makes it where it fits perfectly in the center of your wreath form. I'm using a 14-inch wire wreath form. You can also use a 12-inch or a 10-inch, depending on how big you want your flower to be. To attach the canvas to the form, I flip it upside down, and then I am feeding a zip tie through the canvas and then around the centermost bar. I leave it pretty loose to begin with, so I can go through and tighten it later and position it exactly where I want it. And once I do one on one side, I go across to the other side. And I do it kind of like four corners, except this is a circle. And then the rest I fill in where I see holes. And then I'm just going to go through and trim the zip ties. And here's all the places that I added zip ties. That gives you an idea. And then I'm just going to push them to the front so there's no rough edges sticking out, so it won't scratch your door or anything. Alright, so for the 21-inch deco mesh, I'm cutting it at 10.5 inches. And then I just fold it in half. I didn't show that there, but I just folded the mesh in half and then do the corner to corner like a triangle. And then pull the two sides in. And then I'm just going to add my zip tie. And before I tighten it all the way, I'm going to kind of mess around with my petal until I like the way it looks. Pull up the center if I want that to be prominent. And just kind of squeeze things in where I want them to be, and then I tighten it. I'm just going to trim away the zip tie, and I trim the tails off of the ends so it gives you a clean spot to work with on the wreath. But there is the 21-inch deco mesh petal. For the 10-inch mesh, I cut 10 by 10 squares, and then I put two together, and I'm going to make them as even as possible all around. And then I'm going to put a corner to a corner, so I make a triangle. And then about 3 inches up, I pinch the center together, just kind of gather it. And then when I'm happy with the way that looks, I'm going to pull the two sides together. And the only thing this does when you're adding two is it makes it thicker so you can't see through the petal. That's why it's usually better to use jute mesh or poly mesh, because they're thicker so you can't see through them. But when you add two layers, it works just the same. Alright, I'm going to do the same thing where I trim away the zip tie and trim the tails. Okay, so attach it to my wreath frame. I'm going in. So I'm going to say the outermost ring is number 1. So I'm going to ring number 2. And I'm going to put the zip tie underneath the bar and then wrap it around on the right side of the existing zip tie that I have on the petal. This just kind of makes a stopper so there's no way to pull the petal off. And then I just tighten it and trim it away. Each section is going to hold a different number of petals because of, like, you can see with the first petal I put on, it's going into the other section. So that section won't need what I think I ended up putting 5 in this section. And again, the same with the first petal. The last petal will go over into the other section. So you'll just go around and mess around with it until you're happy with where you're placing them. And the good thing about zip ties is you can trim them off and move them around if you need to. See right here, it looks like I have a hole, but once I go around and position everything, it goes away. So I'm actually pushing these down through the bar so that they stick up further. And then to do the next layer, I'm going to go to the third ring in and do the exact same thing. I feed it under the bar, I add my petal, and then wrap it around above the zip tie, the existing one that's on the petal. To me, it just feels more secure, so that way it's not going to slide off or be pulled off. And make sure you're pulling these pretty tightly. That way nothing can slide through. Alright, once you go around and do that layer, you're going to start working on the plastic canvas. And the way I do it is I lay down the petal to see where I need to add my zip tie. And then you thread it through. So you go down and then you come back up with the zip tie. And you only want to go over 1 or 2 squares. Then once you lay your petal down, you're going to go above the zip tie that's on the petal. And there you go. You've attached it. And I'm going to show you from further away where you lay down the petal. You find where you want it to be. And then you just attach it. You're going to do the exact same thing to the middle layer, except you're going to move in further. And you'll see as you're going along where you should put petals. I believe I ended up using 65 petals. But you may have more or less petals depending on the size of your frame and the size of your petals. Alright, and again, I'm going to show you from far away how I do the center. I just lay down so I know where to add the zip tie. Okay, so now I'm going to work on my leaves. I decided to just stick with the mesh for the leaves in the center. So I'm just going to cut this at 10.5 inches squares. Now I'm taking one of those squares and I'm taking 2 corners and bringing them together. And then I'm going to cut that in half. And then because I want it to be thick like the wreath I've made, I'm going to double up the layers of mesh. So I put them on top of each other. And then I bring the 2 corners of the triangle together. And then bunch it up. And there's my leaf. I'm going to spray it with hairspray to make it stiff so it sticks where I want it to go. While it's drying, you can kind of pull on the mesh gently to keep it shape. And then once it dries, it usually stays pretty well. And I'm just going to add a zip tie. And before I close it all the way, I'm going to add another one on top. And that's just so I can connect it to the wreath frame in just a second. Like I said, you're going to use a lot of zip ties. And when I'm attaching this, I'm doing it at a crossbar right there. That way it doesn't want to move. Once I added this one zip tie, I didn't like how it felt. It was too flimsy and it didn't stick up like I wanted it to. So I'm just going to turn it over and add a larger zip tie to it. And to me, this just keeps it more secure to the frame, and it helps you put it in the position you want it to be in, and it stays. I wanted mine to be pushed forward a little bit more and to stick straight out instead of falling backwards. And I'm going to do that 3 times, so I'm going to have 3 leaves around To make my center, I'm going to take this piece of foam that I found in the floral section at Dollar Tree, and I'm going to very carefully use a knife to trim it. You could probably leave it that size. I just want mine smaller. And I'm just going to use the top part because it's bigger. Like I said, be very careful when you do this. Now I'm just going to add some paper to it. You don't have to do this since it's green and the mesh I'm using is green. I just think it looks better. So I'm just using some cardstock. And I'm going to hot glue pieces to the foam. I'm going to glue one on top, which is the one I'm cutting out here. And then I do cut strips of paper to attach to the sides. And again, you don't have to do this. And you can actually paint it if you have paint, or you don't have to worry about it. I just think it looks a lot better through the mesh. The color's brighter, which matches the neon. And be very careful using hot glue. So I'm going to end up using 2 layers of mesh, and I'm just cutting squares of it and attaching it with zip ties. I'm twisting it very tightly, making sure there's no wrinkles, no bumps. And I do 2 layers. Originally, I was going to try to make the stripes line up on the front, the stripes of mesh, or the metallic stripes in the mesh. But it actually looks better when I do like a crisscross. You should be able to see it at the end. You just play around with it and make it your own. And then I just gather it. Kind of like wrapping a present. This was my first time using mesh to cover the center. I normally use burlap. To me, they both work just as well. The burlap covers better, doesn't have as many holes, and it's not as see-through. But when you cover the center with paper, you can't really see it. And I'm just going to use another zip tie on this layer. It's not necessary to do 2 layers. I just wanted it to match the rest of the wreath. And now I'm just going to trim everything away. I go and put some hot glue all over it. This is kind of to tighten it because it was kind of melting it, and it makes it really secure to the foam. And then once it dries, I'm trimming the tail away. You don't have to do that step. It made me feel better when it was super connected. Now I'm just folding the paper over on itself and just drawing a circle like I did on the front. And I'm just going to hot glue that to the back. I thought the center sticking up might be a problem, but it turns out it doesn't cause any issues. It kind of helps when I'm feeding the zip ties through in a minute. I found it easier to turn it over and press until it dried. Alright, this is the way I connect it to the wreath. I'm sure there are other ways to do it, probably simpler ways. This is just the way I figured out how to do it. I'm using large zip ties, and I use my knife to cut holes, and then I'm just feeding it through, and I'm doing it twice, one on either side. Then I'm going to place it on the wreath where I want it, and then I can kind of look under and see where the zip ties are going to lay. And I drew black lines, and then I turn it over and you can see the black lines on the back. So I'm using scissors just to trim little holes. I'm honestly just connecting 2 squares together. To push the larger part of the zip tie through, I make the hole slightly larger. And then you can't see it, but I'm pushing it through right here. And then I just connect them together and tighten. I make sure my center's where I want it. And that's it. That's how I made my neon flower petal wreath. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below, or you can email me at craftingwithlee@yahoo.com. Thanks so much for watching, and if you like my video, please like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.